He abandoned me for his younger coworker. His family supported him. I was left alone. But now, he's begging to return. Should I take him back? I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I held the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. I was pregnant. A wave of emotions crashed over me: excitement, fear, hope. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 3 years. We never had a serious talk about kids, but we always said, someday. Well, someday had arrived. That night, I made his favorite dinner: grilled steak, mashed potatoes, a glass of red wine. My heart pounded as I imagined his reaction. Would he be shocked? Happy? Nervous? When he walked through the door, I greeted him with a smile. Hey, babe. Long day? Exhausting, he sighed, loosening his tie. Board meeting ran over. I swear, these new hires have no idea what they're doing. I hesitated. Maybe this wasn't the best time. But when would it be? I took a deep breath. Daniel. I have something to tell you. He glanced up, mid-sip of his wine. What's up? I placed the small white test on the table, my heart racing. I'm pregnant. The glass in his hand stopped midair. His expression didn't light up. He didn't reach for me. He just froze. For a moment, I thought he was processing. And then, he did something I never expected. He laughed. A hollow, humorless sound. Pregnant, he repeated, setting down his glass. You're joking, right? I swallowed. No, Daniel. You ruined everything. I blinked. What? His chair scraped against the hardwood as he stood up abruptly, rubbing his temples. This was not supposed to happen. I felt my stomach drop. I have a promotion coming up, Michelle. A huge opportunity. And now you're telling me I'm going to be tied down? This isn't. He shook his head, running his hands through his hair. This is a disaster. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Daniel, we can figure this out. We're married. We love each other. But he wasn't listening. He was already walking away, muttering under his breath. That same night, he packed a bag and left. I stood there, numb, watching the man I loved walk out the door. Not just on me. But on our baby. The front door slammed shut. Silence swallowed the house. I stood there, motionless, staring at the half-empty glass of wine on the table, my untouched dinner growing cold. Just hours ago, I thought tonight would be one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, I had just been told I had ruined everything. Daniel was gone. I wanted to believe he just needed time to process. That he would come back once he calmed down. That he would hold me and say it was just shock talking. But deep down, I knew better. I barely slept. My body was exhausted, my mind racing, flipping between rage and heartbreak. I reached for my phone, half hoping to see a text from Daniel. There was one. Daniel, I'm staying somewhere else for a while. Don't try to change my mind. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a cold, distant declaration. I clenched my jaw and typed back. Me, so that's it? You're leaving us? The dots appeared. Then disappeared. He didn't answer. Instead, 20 minutes later, I got a message from his mother. Daniel's mom, Michelle, honey. I know this is hard, but you need to understand. Daniel is still young. He has a future ahead of him. He's just not ready to be a father. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I typed furiously. He's 32. He's a grown man. What do you mean he's not ready? Her response was immediate. Daniel's mom, he has a career to focus on. He's finally getting ahead. A baby right now would hold him back. We all just want what's best for him. We all. They weren't just excusing his behavior. They were supporting it. My hands shook as I read those words over and over. He wasn't coming back. And his parents, the people who had smiled at our wedding, who had called me their daughter-in-law, were on his side. I wasn't just abandoned. I was alone. I curled up on the couch, pressing a hand against my stomach. "It's just us now," I whispered. And I swore I wouldn't beg him to stay. Days passed. Then a week. No calls. No messages. Nothing. I tried to pretend I was fine. That I could handle this. That I wasn't sitting in an empty house, staring at the door, hoping, just for a second, that Daniel would walk through it. He never did. Instead, I saw him somewhere else. I went to the grocery store, trying to distract myself. I walked past the baby aisle, hesitated, then quickly turned away. I wasn't ready for that yet. But fate had other plans. Because as I rounded the corner, I saw him. Daniel. Laughing. With her. She was young, maybe mid-20s. Blonde. Too perfect. Dressed in business casual, looking like she had just walked out of an office. His colleague. I felt my stomach tighten. My breath caught in my throat. And then I saw it, his hand on her back. Gentle. Familiar. The way he used to touch me. Something inside me cracked. He hadn't just left. He had moved on. I turned, walking away as fast as I could. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking. I told myself I didn't need to know more. But I did. That night, I checked his social media. I hadn't unfollowed him yet, maybe some part of me had still held on to hope. But now? I needed the truth. And there it was. A picture. Daniel. At a rooftop bar. Smiling. His arm draped casually around her. The caption? New beginnings. I stared at the screen. My vision blurred. My chest ached in a way I had never felt before. I wanted to scream. To throw my phone across the room. To message him, demand answers, ask him how he could do this. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath. And I hit unfollow. Because Daniel had made his choice. And now? It was time to make mine. I deleted Daniel from my phone. Blocked his number. Erased every picture. I wanted to forget him. But forgetting isn't easy when you're carrying someone's child. Every morning, I woke up alone in our bed. Every night, I placed my hand on my stomach, whispering to the tiny life growing inside me. It's just us now. No father. No husband. No family support. Just me. And that had to be enough. I got a job. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. Daniel had left me with nothing. Our shared bank account? Wiped clean. The house? Technically his, since his parents helped us buy it. And they weren't about to let me stay. So I packed my things. Found a small one-bedroom apartment. Took a job as a receptionist at a law firm. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I imagined my life would be. But it was mine. No more waiting for calls that never came. No more staring at the door, hoping he'd return. I was moving on. 6 months later, I was at work when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. Hello? A pause. Then. Michelle? My stomach twisted. I knew that voice. Daniel's mother. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you want? A heavy sigh. I just thought you should know. Daniel and Claire, his colleague, well, she left him. I blinked. And? She hesitated. He's not doing well. He's been asking about you. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Oh, so now he remembers I exist? I know he made mistakes, but he's been lost without you, honey. Maybe you could just talk to him. See if. I cut her off. No. A beat of silence. Then. You've changed, she said softly. Yeah, I whispered. I have. I hung up. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt free. Daniel had chosen to leave. And now? I was choosing never to look back. The days passed. Then weeks. I kept waiting for the emotions to hit me, the sadness, the anger, the grief. But they never did. Instead, I felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't wondering when Daniel would come back. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never mean anything. I was done waiting. And just as I finally started truly moving on, life threw me a test. Because Daniel? He came back. It happened on a quiet afternoon. I had just picked up my son from preschool, holding his tiny hand as we walked toward the car. And then, out of nowhere. Michelle. I froze. The voice was too familiar. Too haunting. I turned. And there he was. Daniel. Standing just a few feet away, hands shoved into the pockets of his expensive coat, eyes scanning me as if trying to figure out what had changed. I gripped my son's hand tighter. What are you doing here? He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. He hesitated, glancing down at the little boy at my side. His expression shifted. Wow. He's really. Don't. My voice was firm. You don't get to act surprised. His jaw clenched. I wasn't. You left, Daniel. I met his gaze, refusing to waver. You made your choice. And now, what? You just show up years later, hoping I'll, what? Welcome you back? He took a step forward. Michelle, listen, I know I made mistakes. I was young, I was scared. I laughed. A cold, humorless sound. You weren't young, Daniel. You were a grown man who abandoned his wife and child because it didn't fit into your career plan. He flinched but didn't look away. I regret it every day. A part of me wanted to believe him. A part of me wanted to let him feel the pain I had felt. But I didn't have time for this. I turned to my son and smiled. Let's go home, sweetheart. And without another word, I walked past Daniel. Because he wasn't my problem anymore. I drove home in silence. My son sat in the back seat, humming a song from preschool, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just tried to creep back into our lives. Daniel. After all these years. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. He had looked different. Older. The confidence that once defined him had cracks. The man who had walked out on me so easily now seemed hesitant, almost desperate. But it didn't matter. I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't the heartbroken wife begging for answers. I wasn't the abandoned mother struggling to stay afloat. I had built a life without him. And I wasn't about to let him ruin it. That night, after tucking my son into bed, I checked my phone. A text. From Daniel. I hesitated before opening it. Daniel, I know I have no right to ask, but please, let me talk to you. Just once. I exhaled slowly, my pulse steady. Years ago, that message would have shattered me. Now? It meant nothing. I locked my phone and set it aside. I owed him nothing. The next morning, I was leaving for work when I saw a car parked across the street. Daniel. Waiting. I sighed, closing my eyes for a second before walking straight toward him. He rolled down the window, looking up at me like a man grasping for something just out of reach. I told you no, I said before he could speak. Just 5 minutes, he pleaded. That's all I'm asking. I folded my arms. Why? What do you possibly have to say that could change anything? His jaw tightened. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let out a short laugh. Which one? Leaving me? Leaving your son? Or realizing the grass wasn't greener after all? He swallowed hard. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I can't undo what I did. But Michelle. I want to know him. I want to know my son. My stomach twisted. Not because I believed him. Because I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do next. I took a slow breath, my heart hammering in my chest. I had always imagined this moment, what I'd say if he ever came back. How I'd tear him apart with my words, make him feel an ounce of what I had felt. But now, standing here, the reality was different. Daniel wasn't just asking for me. He was asking for our son. And that wasn't something I could decide in 5 minutes. I stared at Daniel, his words hanging in the cold morning air. I want to know my son. A request so simple. But nothing about it was simple. I had raised this child alone. I had soothed his cries at night, watched his first steps, held his tiny hand on the first day of preschool. Daniel had done none of it. And now, after years of absence, he wanted in. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You don't just get to show up and decide you're a father now. He clenched his jaw. I know that. Do you? I folded my arms. Because being a father isn't about wanting to be there when it's convenient. It's about showing up every single day. And you didn't. His shoulders tensed. I regret it every damn day, Michelle. I studied him. He looked like he meant it. But regrets wouldn't change the past. And they wouldn't protect my son from future disappointment. I shook my head. I don't know what you expect from me, Daniel. But my son is not a second chance for you to fix your mistakes. I just want a chance to be in his life, he said, voice tight. I'm not asking you to take me back. I know I don't deserve that. I just. He ran a hand through his hair, his mask of confidence cracking. I just need to try. I felt a weight press against my chest. Because as much as I wanted to slam the door in his face forever, I wasn't sure if I had the right to. That night, I sat on my couch, replaying the conversation in my head. Daniel wanted in. But did he deserve to be? I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my best friend, Rachel. The second she picked up, I let it all spill out, how he showed up, how he wanted to meet our son, how I didn't know what to do. When I finished, there was silence. Then, Michelle, Rachel said, her voice sharp, you owe him nothing. I sighed. I know. But, do I owe my son the chance to know his father? A pause. Then softer, that depends. Do you think Daniel will stay this time? I opened my mouth. Then closed it. Because I didn't know the answer. The next day, I got a call. Not from Daniel. From his mother. I hesitated before answering. Hello? She sighed. Michelle. I heard Daniel spoke to you. Of course, he ran to them. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice neutral. He did. Another sigh. Look, I know my son made mistakes. But he's different now. He's been through a lot. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. Like what? She hesitated. Then, finally, Claire, she left him. He lost his job. He's been struggling. I almost laughed. So now that his life is a mess, he suddenly remembers his responsibilities. That's not fair. I clenched my teeth. You know what's not fair? Raising a child alone while the father starts a new life and pretends we don't exist. She was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully. I just don't want you to punish him forever. I shut my eyes, exhaustion creeping in. This isn't about him, I said. It's about my son. And that was the truth. Because I didn't care if Daniel was hurting now. I cared about whether he would hurt our son later. And I still wasn't sure what to do. The next few days, I tried to push Daniel out of my mind. Tried to focus on work. On my son. On the life I had built without him. But every night, after my son was asleep, I found myself staring at the ceiling, his words replaying in my head. I just want to know my son. I hated him for leaving. But what if, just what if, keeping him away would hurt my son more? I wasn't ready to answer that question. But I knew someone who might be. I grabbed my phone and hesitated before dialing. Then I hit call. Michelle? My breath caught in my throat. Hey, Dad. Silence. Then, it's been a while. It had. Growing up, my father had been in and out of my life. Some months, he was dad of the year, movie nights, ice cream runs, piggyback rides in the park. Other times, he disappeared for weeks. Months. And every time he left, I told myself I was done hoping for him to stay. Until he came back. And I hoped all over again. Now, after all these years, I needed his advice. So I asked the one question I had never dared to ask. Do you regret leaving? A heavy pause. Then, softly, every day. He exhaled, his voice rough. I didn't leave because I didn't love you, Michelle. I left because I was a coward. My grip tightened on the phone. And did you ever think about how that felt for me? Every damn day. His voice cracked. I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you this, if Daniel really wants in, if he's ready to do the work, keeping him away won't erase the pain your son will feel when he starts asking where his father is. My throat tightened. And if I let him in, and he leaves again? I whispered. Then that's on him, my father said. But at least your son will know that you tried. I shut my eyes. Tried to steady my breath. Because I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to take that risk. I sat with my father's words long after the call ended. At least your son will know that you tried. I hated how much sense that made. Because my son would ask one day. Maybe not now. Maybe not next year. But one day, he would look up at me with those big, innocent eyes and ask, Mommy, where's my dad? And I wouldn't know what to say. Would I tell him the truth? That his father ran away because he was scared? Or would I tell him that I never even gave Daniel a chance to come back? Neither answer felt right. Because the truth was, I didn't want Daniel back in our lives. But I had to decide what was more important, my anger or my son's future. I texted Daniel. We need to talk. Just us. No promises. It took less than a minute for him to respond. Daniel, thank you. Name the time and place. That night, I sat across from him in a quiet cafe. No distractions. No interruptions. Just me and the man who had once walked out of my life without a second thought. He looked nervous. Good. I took a sip of my coffee, keeping my voice steady. Before you say anything, let's get one thing straight. I don't trust you. His jaw tensed, but he nodded. I understand. You left us, Daniel. My voice didn't shake. You didn't just leave me, you left him. And now, after years of nothing, you suddenly want to be a father? He exhaled slowly. I know how it looks. How it looks? I let out a cold laugh. It looks like you realized your life isn't as great as you thought it would be, and now you're back because you have nothing else. His eyes darkened. That's not true. I arched a brow. No. Claire left. You lost your job. And now, suddenly, you want to be in your son's life? His hands clenched on the table. You think I don't regret what I did? Every single day, I wake up knowing I made the worst mistake of my life. And you have every right to hate me. But I'm not here for you, Michelle. I'm here for him. I studied him, searching for cracks in his performance. But for the first time, I didn't see excuses. I saw guilt. I saw a man who was actually ashamed of himself. But guilt wasn't enough. Why now? I asked, my voice softer this time. Why not a year ago? Or 2 years ago? He swallowed hard. Because I was a coward. I thought staying away was the right thing. That he'd be better off without me. And now you've changed your mind? His throat bobbed. No. Now I realize I was wrong. Silence stretched between us. I wanted to believe him. But believing him meant giving him the chance to hurt my son the way he hurt me. And that? That terrified me. I leaned forward, my expression unreadable. If you want to be in his life, you don't get to pick and choose when it's convenient for you. I know, he said immediately. You don't get weekends when it fits your schedule. You don't get to disappear and come back when you feel like it. You show up, every time, or not at all. His fingers curled into fists. I will. I studied him, waiting for hesitation. Waiting for excuses. None came. Fine, I said finally. Then we start slow. Supervised visits. No overnight stays. No introductions until I say so. And the second you make my son feel like an afterthought, you're done. Forever. He nodded. I wasn't sure if I believed him. But for my son, I was willing to take the risk. A week passed. A week of waiting. A week of doubt. I told myself I wasn't expecting much. That this wasn't about Daniel, it was about my son. That if Daniel failed to show up, it would only prove what I already knew. That he was unreliable. That he didn't deserve to be a father. That I was right to keep him out. And yet, on the day of their first meeting, I still felt something I hadn't expected. Nervousness. Not for myself. For my son. We met at a park. Neutral ground. Safe. Open. I sat on a bench, watching as Daniel stood a few feet away, shifting from foot to foot. He looked unsure. Hesitant. Nothing like the man who had once walked out of my life without a backward glance. Then, my son ran toward me, his small hands gripping a toy car. Mommy, look, he grinned, holding it up. It goes super fast. I smiled, brushing his hair back. I see that, sweetheart. Then I turned him slightly. Hey, I said gently. There's someone I want you to meet. He blinked up at me, then followed my gaze toward Daniel. My ex-husband visibly swallowed. Hi, buddy, Daniel said, voice soft, uncertain. I'm your dad. My son tilted his head. You're my dad? Daniel's hands curled at his sides. Yeah, I am. For a second, the world stood still. Then my son shrugged. Okay, he said simply. Wanna race my car? Daniel exhaled, like he had been holding his breath. He smiled, a real smile, not the fake corporate one I used to hate. Yeah, he said, crouching down. Let's race. I sat back, watching as they lined up the toy cars and counted down together. It was strange. Surreal. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward Daniel. I just felt tired. Because this wasn't about my pain anymore. It was about whether my son would get the father he deserved. Over the next few weeks, Daniel kept showing up. No excuses. No cancellations. He played with our son at the park. He listened to him talk about dinosaurs, about superheroes, about everything that mattered in his little world. And with every visit, I felt my walls start to crack. Not because I forgave him, but because I saw something I had never seen before. Effort. Real, genuine effort. But effort wasn't enough. Because no matter how much he wanted to be a father now, there was always the fear that one day, he'd leave again. And this time, it wouldn't just be me left behind. It would be my son. And I would never let that happen. Weeks turned into months. Daniel kept showing up. Kept proving, at least for now, that he wasn't the same man who had walked away years ago. I watched him closely. Not as a bitter ex-wife. Not as the woman he had abandoned. But as a mother. And I asked myself one question every day. Is this man worthy of my son? At first, I thought the answer was no. But slowly, doubt crept in. Because my son, he loved every second with his father. And no matter how much I wanted to hate Daniel, I couldn't ignore that. Until the day he almost proved me right. It was a Friday. My son had been talking all week about Daniel taking him to the Science Museum. He had been counting down the days. I dropped him off at the meeting spot. Watched as he ran to Daniel, eyes full of excitement. And then, an hour later, my phone rang. I picked up. Hey, what's up? A pause. Then, Michelle. I can't make it today. My heart stopped. What? Daniel exhaled sharply. Something came up at work. I can't get away. I felt cold rage creep up my spine. Are you serious? I could already see my son's face when he realized. The disappointment. The hurt. The feeling of being abandoned. And I snapped. Let me make this clear, Daniel, I said, my voice shaking. If you walk away this time, you don't get to come back. Not to me. Not to him. I will not let you break his heart the way you broke mine. Silence. For a long, long moment, I thought he was going to choose work over his son again. And then, quietly, you're right. I gripped the phone tighter. What? I'll be there in 20 minutes. And he was. That night, as I watched my son fall asleep with a smile on his face, I realized something. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel was finally trying to be a father. But could I ever let myself trust that? Months passed. And Daniel? He didn't leave this time. He showed up. Every weekend. Every holiday. He listened. He learned. He became a father. But the one thing he never did? He never asked for me back. Not once. And that was what told me the most. This time, he wasn't here to fix his own loneliness. He was here for our son. And yet, there was still one question I had to answer. Is this enough? One evening, after Daniel dropped our son off, he lingered at the door. Michelle, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Can I say something? I folded my arms. You usually do. He chuckled. Then his face grew serious. I don't expect you to ever forgive me. I swallowed. Good. But I need you to know. I love our son. I know I don't deserve him. I know I don't deserve you. He hesitated. But I'll never leave again. No matter what. I studied him. Really studied him. And for the first time, I believed him. But it wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I took a slow breath. I'm glad you're in his life now, Daniel. But you'll never get the chance to hurt me again. He nodded, eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Regret. Acceptance. Maybe both. I smiled faintly. Good night, Daniel. And then, for the first time ever, I shut the door without looking back. Because this wasn't a story about a woman forgiving a man who broke her. This was a story about a woman who didn't need him anymore. And that? That was the real victory.